Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show.
Tales from the Loop is the thoughtful sci-fi show on Amazon Prime. Episode 4, Ecosphere, is all about Russ and Cole, who spend an awful lot of time together and clearly have a really nice granddad and grandson relationship, very much different from the strained relationship that Russ has with his son, Cole's dad. And Cole likes to help his G-dad out in the garden, catching fireflies, and when they're saying goodbye they like to have pretend finger gunfights. But Russ isn't as young as he used to be, because he's slowing down. Just like everything in his life, things don't seem to be quite as reliable as they once were. And then one day the pair of them wander off to see the Ecosphere. That's a giant metal globe that you can speak into, and when you do, it echoes back a certain number of times, representing how long you're going to live in your life. And Cole gets 6 echoes, but when Russ speaks into it there's no echo at all, because as he tells the family later on, he's dying, and it's going to be sooner rather than later. So he tidies up his affairs and puts Loretta in charge of the loop, fixes his broken toilet, and then takes Cole out to the light fields to see the illumination. And then the pair have their usual gunfight at the car. And it's kind of a sad parting, and Russ gets a bit emotional on the way home, probably because he knows that the time's near. And he tells his wife that
we should put something here.
Then he goes to his bedroom and he collapses. And when Cole finds out that he's in the hospital, he goes charging off to the loop and sneaks in through a vent. But he gets caught when he's near the eclipse, and his parents have to break it to him that nothing in the loop can fix everything and suddenly make Russ better again. And days and weeks pass, and Cole helps out his granny and ponders on the meaning of it all, but then he overhears his parents talk.
Just wish he would die already.
And he insists that he needs to go and see his granddad. But outside the room his dad warns him that Russ isn't in a good way and he should try and remember him as he used to be and not be scared of how he is now. And Russ, he isn't with it at all, and he starts yelling about being outside in the rain, and it scares Cole and he runs out of the room. And that night, while he's crying and being awkwardly consoled by Jacob, Russ dreams that he's in the loop, merges himself with the eclipse, and the next day he's gone. And sure enough, they do put something on the shelf, his ashes. And Cole doesn't really know what to do, but a kind girl at the wake tells him that she felt just as strange when her mum died, and that seems to help him a bit. And next time he's over visiting his granny, he looks around the rooms and she ends up giving him a photo taken the night that they caught the fireflies, and he realises that he'll always have the memories. And when he goes back to the Ecosphere, we see flashes of the rest of his life, and then the fireflies dancing around the sphere in front of him. So what did I think? Well, I think this week was easily the best episode of this season so far. It's a really simple story, and actually one that doesn't really have that much of a sci-fi angle to it. It's really more of just a simple tale of an old dying man and his young grandson who doesn't really understand the fragility and the passing nature of life. And the plot's resolutely simple, but still effective. Not half just because Jonathan Pryce is one of the greatest living actors on the planet. And I've spoken about how great he is, and when things like The Two Popes, which pretty much everyone's seen, and The Death of Don Quixote, which some people have seen, and one of my favourite films of all time, Regenerations, which pretty much nobody else has seen. But here, it absolutely speaks volumes that he manages to say so much, but saying so little in the actual show. Just, it's all little bits of acting and showing up with simple things and pauses and how age and life is wearying him. I mean, there's a couple of things like the bit where there's a wee drop of pee in the toilet, and I wondered about that. I thought that was a bit strange, but it's just another piece about the puzzle of how his body just isn't working 100% anymore, and backed up by the toilet flush breaking. I mean, the symbolism's so obvious here. It's basically there's a problem with his plumbing. And, you know, him tiring easy and having to hold on to things, and it's all very simple, effective actor choices, and I bet they were in the script as well. And the motifs of death and things ending are layered throughout the whole episode. Things like the fireflies dying at the start, which gave us the penny jar, which then led on to the penny jar being broken at the important moment, and then the whistle that wasn't being answered. But I mean, there was also hopeful things. I mean, start with the whistle. That could have been really cheaply done, but I think they establish it early, and because of the fact that he fails to reciprocate the whistle more and more throughout the episode, it's not simply that it's just a thing they establish and then suddenly it's gone for an emotional payoff. It's just showing us that Clara is dealing with it, and dealing with the idea that at some point Russ isn't going to be there. And it's sad, but it's also hopeful. And, you know, Russ might talk about there's no reason to believe in an afterlife, but we see him constantly musing on the past and having this image of Clara sat on the fence, young and pretty, and that's what he's focused on, even in his confusion later on. And I'd like to think that that's maybe where his mind went when he vanished into the eclipse during the dream. Maybe that's his heaven. And we also had the great work between him and Paul Schneider, who plays his son. And there was this whole strained relationship that was underpinned but never gone into. I mean, maybe we'll get it later in the series, but probably not. It was just subtle nuggets of telling information, like Russ saying to Loretta that he should have gone to the wedding, and she says,
"Your son would want to hear that about you going."
Because the rift that needs repaired is between him and his son, not between him and Loretta, but sadly it never is while he's alive. And another thing I really like about the show is it's establishing character beautifully, and it isn't holding your hand or spoon-feeding it to you. It just shows you these people, and it makes them realistic, and lets you fill in the rest using your knowledge of what people are like in real life. It's really, really clever filmmaking. And also subtle things like the bookending of the shot of Cole getting driven away and looking in the mirror. I mean, it's just nice stuff. There's so much nice stuff in this episode. But while this was an amazing episode, and probably the best fusion of the style and story that this show does, at more than a few points, it was definitely peddling water. And like always, this probably could have been done in half an hour rather than a full hour, or maybe just a wee bit longer than that. And also, not to be unkind, it's a slightly manipulative and saccharine story that absolutely tugs on every single heartstring that anyone might have about a grandparent that they loved that's died. I mean, at times it was a little bit House on the Prairie kind of stuff, and, you know, the whole thing of it's being about a kid learning a lesson that eventually someone they know is going to die. I mean, that's been done on everything from Little Miss Sunshine to Charlotte's Web. And I'm still struggling with how aimless this show is as a whole. I mean, I'm genuinely worried that none of this is actually going to come together in any kind of cohesive sense. It's just going to be random stories, and then that'll be it, then it'll just stop. I mean, if that is the case, that's a shame, because if they manage to pull it all together in a clever way, that would be really fascinating. But let's just see what happens next time. When the new character next week could be anyone, really. I mean, maybe it's the granny, or maybe it could be the wee lassie that Cole met at the wake. I mean, that seems like a bit of a forced character introduction, but I've been wrong before. So till then, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.